Good morning. I'm so glad that you chose to be here today. It's a beautiful day, and like the airlines say, we know that you have a lot of choices. And we're glad that you chose to fly with us today. I hope everybody can hear me. I think I usually project pretty well. We've got a microphone here, and there's another one over there, and there's this clip-on one that I wear, largely because Dan tries to record these sermons for people who may not be able to be here. He can burn them a CD, and it took him only about 2 years to learn how to do that. But he's got it down. He's got it down, and so I've got this clip-on mic, and every Sunday, in between Sunday school and church, he will come up to me and hand me this wireless microphone, and I have to clip it on my belt here and clip it on my tie. And there's a little button here that says off, mute, and on. And I always check that because it's usually in the on position. And so I'll say to Dan, this is on, right? And he'll say, yeah, but I've got it turned off back here. And I've wondered, want to make sure that it's turned off back there, because I don't want to be singing and have everybody in the whole church just hearing my voice coming out real loud. So I told that to Dan this morning. He said, yeah, or you wouldn't want to be in the bathroom. And I said, I never thought of that. And he said, it happened. So you'll have to talk to Dan for the details on that. But this is what we go through trying to harness technology for your benefit. Quite by accident, this morning in class, I was reading in John chapter 8 and found the title of my message. I wasn't looking for it, but there it was. In John chapter 8, verse 48, the Jews answered Jesus, "Aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" What a way to talk to Jesus. "I am not possessed by a demon," said Jesus, "but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. I tell you the truth, if a man keeps my word, he will never see death." At this the Jews exclaimed, "Now we know that you are demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that if a man keeps your word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are?" Now, I'm not going to read the rest of that. It'd be great for you to, though, because that's a really good passage on who Jesus claimed to be. And after all, Tim Adornetto suggested you read the Gospels, so there's a perfect thing you could look at later today if you wanted to read the rest of that story. But you notice that, who do you think you are? That's the title of my message today. And I didn't even plan that. But I do love the fact that those Pharisees said that to Jesus. Because that's what people say when they're trying to insult somebody. Who do you think you are? They didn't really want to know. Hey, Jesus, we were just wondering, who is it that you think you are? I mean, what's your spin on it? Give us your take on it. What's your identity? That's not what they meant at all. They meant it as an insult. Who do you think you are? Has anyone ever said that to you? There's a lot of different ways of saying that. You could say, "Who died and left you, boss?" In other words, who do you think you are? And it's usually when you're claiming some authority that they don't think you should claim. Who do you think you are? I'd like to know today, this morning, who do you think you are? Only I don't mean it in the insulting way. I just flat out mean it the way it sounds. Who do you think you are? You might say, well, I don't think about it. Well, we're going to think about it. Who do you think you are as you sit here today? Well, I think it partially depends on who you ask. Who do you think you are? Who are you asking? If you're asking yourself, you might have a little bit of a skewed answer. Look in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16. Right after Psalms, we get Proverbs. And we're going to be in chapter 16 for just a moment. Let's see, Proverbs was written by Solomon, the son of King David. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived on earth. And that's because God gave him a choice when he became the king. He said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do for you because you're David's son, and I made some great promises to David. What I'm going to do for you, Solomon, is I'm going to let you take your choice. I'm going to bless you up one side and down the other, but it's your choice which category. You want to be the richest man who ever lived, Solomon? Or do you want to be the wisest man who ever lived? Your choice. Door number 1, door number 2, take your pick. Solomon thought for a minute and he said, well, Lord, I think I will take the wisdom. God says, you have answered really in a good way, and because of such a noble answer, I'm going to give you both doors. I'm going to make you the richest king who ever ruled, and I'm going to make you the wisest man who ever lived. And Solomon had more gold, more silver, more horses, more chariots, more everything than anybody else, ever. And Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. Not because of his own wisdom, because God gave it to him. And God can do that. He can give you whatever he wants. And he can withhold whatever he wants. But he gave Solomon excellent wisdom. And Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. Now, there is just, after that 3-minute little exposition, there is no excuse for you to not read the book of Proverbs. As you're stumbling around in the world trying to figure out what is going on, what's wrong with my marriage, what's wrong with my kids, what's wrong with my health, what's wrong with our country, what's wrong with our culture, what's wrong? I don't understand. Read the book that was written by the wisest guy who ever lived. And Proverbs is broken down into 31 chapters. And the longest month that we have in any year is 31 days. So you can just decide, I'm going to read the Proverbs whenever it occurs to me. If it occurs to me on July 7th, I'm going to read Proverbs chapter 7. It's nothing but a bunch of spiritual one-liners mostly. And boy, will you get wisdom. And then hopefully the next day, on July 8th, you'll read Proverbs chapter 8. But if you forget and you don't remember again until August 14th, then you just read Proverbs 14 that day. And if you will just do this, it'd be great if you read one every day before you read one of the Gospels. But even if you don't read it every day, if you will just do this whenever you think of it. What's the date? I'm going to read that proverb. The date can never be bigger than 31, and that's the last chapter. And every month starts with number 1, and that's the first chapter. So you can read Proverbs throughout your life, and you will be dipped in and soaked in incredible life-changing wisdom. I just threw that in for free. Thank you. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 2, coming from this wise king. Remember, we're on the subject, who do you think you are? Well, it depends on who you ask. Well, you can ask yourself, but listen to what the wise king says about yourself. All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord. And isn't that the truth? Isn't that the way we are? All a man seem right in his own eyes. That's called being subjective. Very often I can see flaws and faults in other people that are the same flaws and faults that I have. But for some reason, I just can't see them in me. So who do I think I am? Well, it depends on who I ask. If I'm asking me, I'm not going to get a very good answer. I'm not going to get a trustworthy answer. Better for me to look in the mirror of the Scriptures and see the truth. Or have the courage to ask somebody else who loves me enough to tell me the truth and who will speak the truth in love. But if you're just looking at yourself in your own eyes, you're going to get a subjective evaluation about who you are. I think I'm pretty smart. And pretty good looking. And I think I'm a pretty nice guy. I think I'm really nice. I think I'm nicer than most people. If everybody were as nice as I am, this would be a better world. Why are you laughing, George? But it's because all of a man's ways seem right in his own eyes. But what does the Lord do? The Lord judges the heart. You see, God can see inside of me where I may not even see, and you certainly cannot see. So who do I think I am? Who do you think you are? Depends on who you're asking. If you're asking yourself, you're going to get a skewed answer. Look in Romans chapter 12, over in the New Testament. In Romans chapter 12, verse 1, therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith God has given you. I'm telling every one of you, Paul said to the Roman Christians. So I might as well say it to you. I'm not Paul, but you're Christians. And we're not in Rome, but that doesn't matter. It applies. I'm telling every one of you. Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought to, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. Sober doesn't mean that you're not drunk. It means clear your head and be objective. Be honest. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to. I love that it does not say, I'm telling every one of you, do not think of yourself highly. Aren't you glad that's not what it says? We're supposed to think of ourselves highly. Whose image am I created in? God's. I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself. If I don't love myself, I can't love you. Think of yourself highly. Did you know that the only perfect human being was sacrificed? We just celebrated his body and his blood. Was sacrificed on a cross for one reason, because God loves you so much. He couldn't stand the idea of you going to hell instead of heaven. God loves you. Even in the sin that you don't admit you have. God loves you. He is not going to let you perish. And so he sent Jesus to die in your place. So think highly of yourself. You are priceless and precious to God, so much so that he let the only perfect man die in your place. Think very highly of yourself, but not more highly than you ought to. There's a difference between thinking highly of yourself and thinking more highly of yourself than you ought to. Thinking more highly of yourself than you ought to makes you conceited. It means you're delusional. It means you're not in reality. It means you're hard to be around. It means you're not being honest with yourself. But God can still see your heart. Remember what the wise king said in Proverbs 16? God knows the truth. So don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to. And really this whole section here about who do you think you are? Well, it depends on who you ask. Point number one, you can ask yourself. And we're showing you now that if you ask yourself, you're going to get a skewed answer. Your tendency is to think that all your ways are right in your own eyes. Your natural tendency is to think more highly of yourself than you really ought to, instead of having sober judgment. This is about sin, my friends. This is about sin.